The hairs on my arm stand up as the lawyer goes over the details of the accident. The accident happened 10 minutes to 6 the day we were supposed to meet at the diner. The other driver came into Gina's lane and hit her head on. Gina died instantly after the impact. Junior was believed to have passed shortly thereafter. I could feel my blood boil as that was said to me. My focus turned to a tunnel vision of outrage and anger. I turned to look to Dad and Nicholas, and they were upset as well. I said out loud I wanted to end that person. I want him to feel my pain. The lawyer told me to calm down and highly advised me to contain my emotions. Dad placed his hand on mine and told me to relax. He told me to let the lawyer handle it. The courts and jury will decide the fate of the drunk driver. Dad told me that justice will be delivered. I told him okay, that I will calm down and let the justice system handle that scum. We turned to the lawyer and asked him what he will be charged with and how many years he will serve. The lawyer told us he would be charged with vehicular homicide, 2 counts, driving under the influence and reckless driving. The lawyer believes he can get a conviction on each count and he could serve the rest of his life behind bars. As he said that, I saw Gina and Junior's face in my mind. That person could spend the rest of his life behind bars. But I would spend the rest of my life alone without bars. Nicholas asked who the driver was that hit Gina. The lawyer, whose name is Raymond, told us the driver was Roy Glad, a 20-year-old. Dad looked at Raymond and asked him if that was the son of Rachel Glad. Raymond said yes, that is her son. Dad and Nicholas made a sound of frustration and looked at Raymond with anger. I was lost. I had no idea what they were talking about. Dad told Raymond that we should seek another venue for this trial. I asked why and also asked who was this person. Nicholas explained to me who they were. Roy was the only son of Rachel Glad. She married Jim Davis 10 years ago, and he legally adopted Roy as his own son. Jim Davis is the judge of our county and would preside over the case. Raymond told us not to worry. Judge Davis was bound by law to have a fair trial. Dad told Raymond we also have the law on our side to change location and the judge that would look over our case. Raymond said yes, but that would delay the trial and Roy would walk free until the trial begins. Raymond asked us if that's what we wanted. I said no, I wanted him locked up as soon as possible. Dad asked Raymond if he was sure that we would have a fair trial. Raymond insisted that we would have a fair trial. Nicholas, Dad, and me told Raymond to proceed and get a trial date. We wanted that person to pay the price for what he did. Raymond told us he will do everything in his power to get a life sentence and make sure he never walks the streets again. Raymond pitched us a strong line. He made us believe that he would throw the book at this guy. He made us believe that he was on our side. He made us believe in him, and we did. We believed and put our trust in everything that Raymond had told us. He left my apartment along with Nicholas. Dad was about to leave as well, but turns to me before he left. He told me to take it easy and calm down. He understands that I have a lot of anger inside of me, but I should be calm and remember all the good times. I thanked him for those kind words and told him I would be okay. As everyone left, the reality of loneliness settled in. With my back to the door, I see the entire apartment in front of me. I walked to the restroom and passed each room. I passed the dining room where I first proposed to Gina. I go through the kitchen where she told me she was pregnant. The living room where the 3 of us sat as a family and watched TV. Then to the bedroom. In the corner was Junior's crib where he would sleep, and our bed where Gina and myself slept. Now it was all gone. A house once full of life, and with the future in front of us, is now an empty shell. It's hollow and quiet between these walls. It even feels like the sun stopped coming through the windows. I try to take my dad's advice and not to let the anger consume me, but it's easier to feel the anger rather than what little love was left. I sat on the couch and looked at a blank screen on the TV. I remember all the love that filled this house, but as I remember that, I feel the anger brew within me. That day the phone rang. I figured it was Dad, so I answered. Only it wasn't Dad, but rather the bank. I guess the people over there didn't know what had happened. It was a loan officer that Gina and me were dealing with. She told me all the paperwork was ready and all she needs was Gina and me to go over and sign the paperwork. Once the paperwork was signed, the house would be all ours. The house out in the country with the acres. The one where we would grow old together and our kids would play. I held in my tears and took a deep breath. I informed her of the situation and told her we, or rather I, would not be purchasing the house. She gave me her condolences and said she understood. More condolences and more broken dreams. I couldn't handle that and closed my eyes. A knock at the door woke me up. It was Dad standing there with the bag in his hand. I let him in and he told me he brought breakfast. It was another day. I have been losing track of my days. I actually don't care what day it is anymore. Dad tells me to pull it together and the trial starts tomorrow. I should be there every day till he goes to jail. I tell him he's right and I'll be okay and get my head on straight. Dad tells me to wash up and put on some clean clothes. I asked him why and he tells me he is taking me outside to get fresh air. I'm glad Dad is here. He has been a huge help for me. Because of him, I'm staying somewhat sane through these insane times. I wash up and put on some clean clothes. Dad and me leave the apartment and spend all day together. We walked around town and in the park. People still shook my hand and offered their condolences. Dad tells me everything will be all right and he is here for me. He almost makes me cry when he says that. We ended the day with a walk to the cemetery. We took Mom flowers. We also placed flowers in Gina's plot and took a small toy for Junior. Dad takes me home and tells me to get ready for tomorrow. He gives me a hug and heads out. Tomorrow is the beginning of the trial. I don't know what to expect or how it will go. I just hope Raymond delivers on his promise and puts him away forever. I hate that person, but I can't let that show when I'm in there in the courthouse. I wake up early the next day. I wash up and put on a tuxedo to go to the courthouse. Call it intentional or whatever, but I put on the same tuxedo that I wore at Gina and Junior's funeral. I wanted the judge and everyone to see that. I want them to see and feel as I did that day. I want them to see and feel the emptiness that I have become. So they too can understand what he has taken from me. Dad picked me up. He stood at the doorstep and smiled at me. He patted me on the shoulder and said I looked good. We got in his car and went over to the courthouse. On the way over, Dad and I had a talk. It had been a while since we had a father-son talk, but he felt today was the day we needed to have one. Son, I just want to tell you how proud I am of you. I know you are going through hell right now, but you have become a man that I am proud of. I always wanted the best for you and succeed in everything you set out for. I'm sorry you have to go through this, but it will only make a stronger person out of you in the end. Your mom would be so proud of you, son. I love you, Dad tells me. We both wept a little as he told me that. I wish we had more conversations like that. Deep emotional talks that soothe the soul. We arrived at the courthouse and walked in. Raymond waited outside and guided us in. Nicholas arrived shortly after us and sat with us. We sat behind Raymond in the front row. The trial had begun. The judge walked in and the jury shortly after. After that, a police officer walked in with Roy. That scum had walked in and had no emotion to him. Just a blank face without a care in the world. I hope that scum spends all eternity behind bars. The judge calls everyone to order and Dad pats me on the back and smiles at me. Here we go. I think to myself, the evidence is too overwhelming against Roy. He has no chance of winning. Might as well go straight to the sentencing phase, I tell myself. Although I wish that was the case. I wish I could say the story ends here and Roy gets sentenced to life in prison. But that wasn't the case, not by a long shot. As the judge calls to order, Roy's attorney calls for Raymond to approach the judge. They go up to the judge and talk for what seems like hours. But in reality, only several minutes went by and Roy's attorney and Raymond go back to their seats. Raymond turns to me, Dad, and Nicholas and tells us he is sorry. We are confused. What was he sorry about? Then the judge speaks. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of new evidence, the trial cannot move forward. It appears that the test used to administer the blood alcohol content was expired. Aside from that, once the defendant was detained, no officer read him his Miranda rights. With that said, it is a mistrial and the defendant is free to go, the judge says. My head begins to spin out of control as the judge puts his hammer down. This scum gets to walk free as if nothing happened. No. I can't, I won't let him. My body fills with rage as I see Roy hugging his attorney with a smile. I stood up and get ready to charge at him. With every ounce of rage, I will get vengeance on Roy. That is what I wanted to do. That's what I planned, but as I stood up and looked down to my dad, he was sitting down, but there was something going on with him. He was clenching his chest and leaning forward. I called to him, but he didn't answer. He then fell out of his chair and to the floor as he remained clenching his chest area. I yelled for help. Everything became blurry as I saw Dad in pain. The bailiff called for an ambulance. Dad was hurried off the hospital. I remember being at the hospital and seeing a very familiar face. It was the doctor that told me Gina and Junior had passed away. I was hoping he would tell me good news this time. He came up to me and told me that Dad had passed. I could feel the world crumbling around me. What little love I had inside of me faded. The only life sentence that was handed down in that court was a lifetime of sorrow and rage for me. No justice delivered. I laid in bed lost and broken. Emotions had been stripped of me. 3 days after my dad passed, we laid him to rest. He would rest alongside Mom and down the road from Gina and Junior. That day I saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. It was my cousin Joe. I hadn't seen him in years. I believe the last time I saw him was at high school graduation. After that day he joined the military and had been gone. He gave me a hug and told me he was sorry for my loss. I told him thank you, and it's been tough losing him shortly after Gina and Junior. He told me he had no idea what I was going through, but I could call him anytime and talk. I thanked him and said it was good to see him. A week had passed by when I heard a knock at my door. I opened the door and was surprised to see Raymond standing there. He had a suitcase in hand. I invited him in and we sat in the dining room. He apologized for the blindside at the courthouse that day and offered condolences on Dad passing. He said he was here for business purposes. He told me he filed a civil suit and the family responded with a generous offer. I didn't know what he was talking about and asked him to explain it to me. Raymond told me although we lost the criminal trial, we could file a civil lawsuit for wrongful death. The defendant could be found guilty and pay a money amount to me. He wouldn't go to jail, but he would take a financial hit. I tell him okay, and why should it matter to me? Raymond tells me that after the trial he filed the wrongful death suit against Roy and his family. Today they responded with the money offered to settle the lawsuit. He tells me they offered $1 million tax-free to end the civil case. I look at Raymond and ask him what that means. He hands me a check made out to me for $1 million. He tells me to take the check and move on with my life. I asked if we can still proceed with criminal charges. He says no, and this is the justice that can be delivered. I slammed my fist on the table and tell Raymond money does no justice. He apologizes and tells me that it is all he can do. Raymond tells me he is sorry and leaves my house. He leaves the check behind, and now I have $1 million. All that money couldn't bring back all that I have lost. $1 million can't bring back the millions of emotions that I have lost. It can't replace the loneliness that I feel. I called Nicholas and tell him of what happened. I told him I didn't want it. I tell him all I want is Gina and Junior back. Tears flow down my face and my breathing becomes heavy. Nicholas tells me in a calm voice it will be okay. He goes on and tells me everything happens for a reason and we cannot change what has already happened. All we can do is move forward. I asked him how. How can I move forward? He comforts me and tells me I'm a good man. Gina loved you so much and she will hate to see you like this. There is nothing left for you here, Greg. Leave this place and start new. Take with you all your memories and find a way to be happy once again. This is your way out of here. Look at it as a gift and not a burden. You have my blessing to move forward, Greg. It will be okay, Nicholas tells me as he begins to cry. Maybe he is right. With Nicholas giving me a blessing and talking about Gina, it brings some relief to me. Maybe Nick was right. If there was something he was right about, was there is nothing here for me. I told myself I will do what Nick suggested and leave this town. The day I decide to leave is the day I flipped upside down. I took the wrong turn to the store and glanced upon a sight I shouldn't have seen. On the opposite side of town, a family and friends had gathered for a cookout. I recognized each one of these people that were laughing and smiling. There was my attorney Raymond, alongside the sheriff, Judge Jim Davis with his wife and the lawyer that represented Roy. Of course, also in that crowd was Roy. There they were all gathered together. It wasn't too long ago when everyone took their place in the courtroom. It was all just an act. All of it was planned out from the beginning. I felt so much anger, so much rage, I felt every vein in my body was going to explode. It was then that I needed revenge. I can't extinguish that feeling. I got back home and was still furious. I didn't know what to do, but I know I wanted to do something. I remembered Cousin Joe. I gave him a call and asked him if he could come over. He said yes, and within an hour he arrived at my house. I told him everything that had happened and what I saw. I told him I wanted revenge and will do whatever it takes to make them suffer. I understand where you're coming from, believe me, I do. Serving in war, I have lost many friends and have that feeling you do now. There's something you need to understand, cousin. If we do this, it won't bring back Gina, Junior, or your dad. If you go through with this, then there is no turning back and it will stay with you forever, Joe tells me. In a blind rage, I told him I want this. I tell Joe I need this. I can't go on knowing they got away with murder. Joe tells me okay. He is calm about all this and tells me of a plan they will do. The plan consists of Joe, a friend, and me. Joe tells me not to worry about the friend, he trusts him and he will remain quiet to his grave. Joe tells me his plan. We will use tranquilizer darts to neutralize each one of them. Once we round them up, we could do whatever justice I have in store. I tell Joe I want them to suffer. He tells me we will bury them alive in a deep grave. I tell him that's perfect. He tells me in 2 days' time we will carry out the plan. 2 days, I know he thinks that will give me time to think about what I want to do. But I didn't change my mind. The day came and I was ready to go through with the plan. Joe had 3 dart guns. Joe would track down the 2 lawyers. His friend would track down the sheriff, judge, and his wife. It was up to me to get Roy. Joe tells me once I have Roy to go down the county road and he will be there waiting for me. The time came around and we set out to get our targets. Joe tells me that Roy would be alone at his house. I went over and sure enough there he was. I looked around and he was alone. I started to wonder how I would neutralize Roy. Then I decided on the easiest way. I rang the doorbell and had the dart gun close by me. Roy answered the door and looked me square in the eyes. He seemed confused as he looked at me. I fired the dart and saw his pupils dilate just before he passed out. I dragged him over to my car and drove to the county road. The anger burned inside of me as Roy laid in the back seat. It took a while, but I reached my destination. Already there was Joe and his friend. I dragged Roy out of the back seat. Joe cuffed Roy's hands and feet. He placed him next to the others. Joe's friend took out some packets and put them close to the noses of Roy and the others. They came to and were shocked when they saw us and where they were. The sheriff was on the left shoulder of the judge, while on his right side was his wife, and her shoulder was to Roy. The 2 lawyers were close by that group. They recognized me right away. The sheriff spoke about how he was the law and we weren't going to get away with this. But Joe kicked him in the mouth and it shut him up. Then the judge looked at me and spoke. I'm sorry for the tragedy in your life. No one here ever wanted those things to happen to you, son. Doing this and whatever you're going to do will not bring anyone back. You might think it will help you, but it will only bring more pain, the judge says. Pain, judge? You don't know my pain. But you will soon, I tell him and everyone there in an angry voice. I look at Joe and his friend and tell them now. We kicked them into the hole. They yell and scream and plead for their life. But those pleas fall on deaf ears. Joe's friend has a backhoe and begins to cover the hole with dirt. It took him 5 minutes to cover the hole. It took an hour and a half to execute our plan and took 2 days to plan it out. I stood by that hole for 37 minutes. 37 minutes to make sure no one would come out of that hole. Those minutes trickled away the anger and rage that was inside of me. Now what remains was the emptiness once again. Joe was right, there was no turning back. The judge said it wouldn't take away the pain. He was right. It was there that I realized I would never see Gina and Junior again. 37 minutes to satisfy my revenge and have a lifetime of regret. But this is not the end, just the end to this life. Now let me tell you how another life story begins.
Thank you for stopping by and listening. Please like, share and subscribe. Also please leave a comment. Once again thank you and we'll see you next week.